Hello and welcome back to Dishonored. This is a pointing episode, which means everything I do in this is pointless and doesn't contribute to the main story of the DLC of Dishonored. However, what I will be doing is reading off the books that we've collected in an audio diary format, so obviously you can expect that. So if you don't want to watch this because you're not interested, you don't have to. You can just skip ahead to the next episode where we'll continue with this story. But for now, I'm going to read this, so if you're still here, you're a pointer. Right, let's begin with the first one then, shall we? The Leviathan's Sorrow. Excerpt from a report on a treatise banned by the Rudshaw Trade Council. Little is known of Pacotti, credited with a series of pamphlets arguing against the whaling trade. While he is gifted, his views are nonsense and threaten the economic underprintings of the empire. Number 1. Enslavement. On the breeding and husbandry of whales versus hunting the beasts in the wild after a natural and free life cycle, Pacotti offers no solutions for where these massive malevolent creatures might be postured. 2. Dissolution. Laments on the destruction of social bonds between herd members. Pacotti actually uses the term families. 3. Harmony. Drivel to the non-aesthetic wonder of what is, in reality, a great and terrible ocean that ever threatens to swallow us, includes arguments of the gentle nature of the brutes, a notion refuted by seamen who return to shore, wide-eyed with tales of the whale's savagery. 4. Disruption. Here Pacotti is of his weakest, floating issues up thievish warnings against the displacement of transference of natural beasts from their native environments. Meat, Death, Bones and Song. Excerpt from a butcher's journal. The owner looks worried when I come home at night. She's looking for that spark, our love, the life we had just 2 years ago, all our ambitions. But the more she pulls at me, the more I resent her. Then, the more I bury all that. When her father was killed at the carriage station, I gave up my studies at the Academy of Natural Philosophy. So mismangled were their finances with so much debts in arrears that her mother and younger brothers would have been ruined had I not. My work feeds us all and keeps the rent paid to that shriveled old leech Wainwright. I hate this work, but in the time of plague it takes all one's efforts to stay aloof at the desperation, the blood and the rats. There are bribes that must be paid to the Lord Regent City Watch, and Barrister Arnold Timish dead counters offered the wrong bureaucrat, and your home is seized and you're off to the flooded district, so it falls to me. Every day I drive my screaming saw into the beast's eyes wide open. I studied them for years at the academy, and on my trips into the field, now working in the slaughterhouse. The wrongness is like a wound in my head. The first months I worked at a numb state, then my permanent mood was anger. Couldn't read that word. Now the wound is scrubbing over, and on some days I feel a kind of power. My entire existence is meat. All there is in my mind is meat, death, bones, and song. The terrifying songs, they come to me in my sleep now. I look into the great eyes, and I take away life slowly. There's a kind of deep connection with the beast, knowing it'll be coming back again and again, removing pieces for hours, sometimes days. They sing for us, a funeral lament. They cause me to tremble. Leona and I share a bed, but the more she tries to make me feel something, the more I recede. The person I was is dead now. Slaughterhouse Row. Excerpt from a book on Dunwall City Districts. For more than 2 decades, a small number of slaughterhouses sat along the Wren Haven, out away from the finer quarters of Dunwall due to the blood, rats, and stench associated with processing meat. Independent whaling ships brought in the occasional leviathan, and barges delivered herds of blood oxen. An individual slaughterhouse might fold due to mismanagement, but the number stayed roughly the same, producing the meat, leather, and grease byproducts needed across the capital city. Only when the roseberry processing treatment was discovered and did the whaling trade begin to rise in premise, driven by the many new uses for the much more volatile refined whale oil, including military and security uses. Early into Empress Jasmine Coldwin's brief reign, the well-known inventor and natural philosopher Anton Sokolov introduced a series of devices that would begin to see deployment across Dunwall, directed by the Royal Spy Master Hiram Burrows. With this lucrative turn of events, the number of slaughterhouses quadrupled, and the demand for fresh whales increased preposterously. Many districts immediately adjacent. I can't read today. Many districts immediately adjacent. Why can't I read? To what was suddenly known as Slaughterhouse Row became to change as families moved away to avoid the industrious fumes and a foul runoff produced by the processing plants. Crime grew overnight, forcing the City Watch to redouble its efforts against Dunwall's gangs. The Arc Mine. My experiments continue to what I've been calling the Arc Mine. Initially, I began the work out of this idle curiosity, working from a nap in the middle of the afternoon, during the month of Clans. I wondered whether it might be possible to separate a flat disc filled with refined whale oil from an array of very short striking rods, until such time as sufficient weight is applied to the upper side of the device. After turning the pragmatic considerations, I imagined the Arc Mine might be used to incinerate some unfortunate member of enemy forces approaching, say, a military encampment. After early tests on livestock proved successful, I requested a live human subject already scheduled for execution for crimes that were, I assure you, most dire. Burroughs was more than happy to comply, assuming he could witness the demonstration. He brought a prisoner from Coldridge, someone named Val, I believe, and we turned him loose in the test area, blindfolded, stumbling about until triggering the device. Burroughs was most pleased, not only because of Arc Mine's effectiveness as a lethal deterrent, but also because of its potential psychological impacts on enemy forces. Further, it left no gore or other mess, and Burroughs as a strong supporter of anything clean and tidy. Loyalty and terrifying, with nothing left to wipe out. Those were his exact words. I've left notes to myself, assuming I pick up the project again, because there are many be a way to produce a version of the Arc Mine that is entirely harmless, simply rendering the subject unconscious. Much more testing is required. Ooh. Okay then. Boat checks on the Wrenhaven. A letter excerpt from a book on members of the City Watch assigned to the Wrenhaven River. Dearest Rutherford, your latest writing brought me a mix of sadness and delight. I was sorry to hear of the passing of your friend Kirkrow from Morley. He was undoubtedly a good man and a worthy ally in your work with the City Watch in Dunwall. I know that the River Patrol is a difficult assignment, especially during these times, but it is important work, so given all that you've told me, I can only assume Sir Corn was as brave as you are, my younger brother. It saddens me that such a vile organisation as the Dead Eels even exists outside the realm of these lurid Gothic novels we read as schoolchildren, but that you and your men should have to face them out on the waters of the Wrenhaven, it's just terrifying. Boats must be checked, I know, but if you should be harmed while ensuring some Tivian fur trader is carrying the correct tax papers, I will forgive this new Lord Regent and his flurry of laws. You talked of adventure when you signed on, and danger seemed to excite you, but you'll forgive me if I hope to see your patrol transfer further west, nearer to Coldwin's Bridge, where the military presence is stronger and the smuggling gangs fear to ply their wicked trade. I've gathered this much from the newspapers, but perhaps there's nowhere safe in Dunwall right now, certainly along the river. It pains me to imagine the customs crew at the checkpoints near your patrol being so short-handed. My mind reels at the thought of how anything else could take priority over my brother's life. I tell you, what I wouldn't give to be in charge of allocating the security details. You'll have 100 men at your side, but I know that is impractical. Please write again when you can. All of us look forward to your words, and I often share them after dinner with our friends and those visiting us here in Driscoll. May your next letter bring news of the eradication or imprisonment of Lizzie Stride and her cursed dead eels. Stay safe, and remember us always, your sister, Pearl. I gave that a male voice. Harpooner songs. What should we do with the Runcorn Sailor? That's the same as what we've always done. Okay then, so whale vivisection. I feel like I've read, but I'll read it again. Excerpt from a note of a natural philosopher aboard a whaling ship. Remarkably, each specimen I had the pleasure of studying during the voyage possessed some minor variance in philosophy. On the second leg of the trip, east of Tivia, the crew hauled aboard a female some 52 inches in length. I estimated she weighed 35 tons, and the ship sat low, rocking side to side through the night with her thrashing. By candlelight I took her apart, sketching and taking notes. Against her bellowing, I cut into the mass of tentacles around her mouth. Within I found row upon row of teeth, and a baleen running along the upper jaw. Though this broom-like structure, I assume she filtered food from the water that was too small to be chewed. Okay. Operating a butcher's saw. Excerpt from a company pamphlet. First, a reminder, all equipment within the Rothwell slaughterhouse is the sole property of Mr. Bundrow Rothwell himself, leased to an individual worker on a per-shift basis. A butcher's saw is not to be equipment and used without proper training and authorization. Misuse of the equipment could result in disfigurement of death. The saw itself is comprised of three systems: power supply, cutting blade, and chip ejector. The reciprocating blade is cast of hardened steel, and when properly maintained, provides severe sharpness. It is created to slice flesh, but with cut bones with ease. The mechanism for powering the blade is a harness supporting custom-sized tanks for whale oil, capable of driving the saw for an entire shift before refueling is required. Care must be taken not to strike, heat, or electrify those tanks. The ejector is a new modification casting out a stream of flat blade fragments, since its girth of a whale often exceeds a butcher's reach. The ejector allows for blasting away unwanted offal, or breaking down those dense bones at a distance. Whale oil processing. Out at sea. Except from the founder of the Greaves Whale House by Ebenezer Greaves. More. Out at sea they secure the beasts with hooks, with lines cast from the main ship and from several smaller boats. Boys, keep the whale from diving deep. Once it's caught, a larger hook is driven through the tail, which is used to hoist the creature up through the chute. They moan and bellow for some time as the men get onto the deck and lift them into the scaffolding overhead. The ship adjusts its prow and returns to port in Dunwall, where the crew works on the great creature, slicing off the fattiest parts while it still lives. Bundry Rothwell, the Opportunist. Excerpt from a investigator's report. Young Rothwell was never convicted of any of the killings. In any case, the court ruled that he had acted in self-defence or the defence of his property. Not that his property was substantial. The Rothwells were not a family of means and depended heavily on the charity of the Abbey of the Everyman. The senior Rothwell went down with the whaling ship Huntress when Boundary was only 10 years old. His mother, Ruth, was lost the following year to an industrial accident at the bottle-making factory where she worked. Rothwell became the sole guardian of his younger brother and managed to support them both by hanging around the harbour, doing odd jobs for whalers who had known his father or others of the Huntress. By then, Bundry Rothwell was already familiar with the club and the knife, and was no stranger to odd occurrences. Things went from bad to worse for Rothwell when, on his 13th birthday, his younger sibling was taken by the overseers. Allegedly, the boy failed the successive trials and did not return home. Rothwell lacked the funds to pay an investigator, and no subsequent hint of his brother's fate has ever been learned. The latest tragedy to befall the Rundwell Rothwell insisted in him a view that the world itself was maleficent and hungry for life, especially innocent life. After a time of black mourning, he approached the whaling ship Cutter and began learning the trade from the crew. Rothwell took to whaling with great success. At sea, he hunted the beasts with a single-minded purpose, and would take extraordinary risks in locating and harpooning his prey. Among the crew, these men he could not beat senseless. He outwitted in short order. He petitioned the maritime barrister Arnold Timish to grant young Rothwell a whaling licence, paying the significant fees himself rather than relying on a sponsor for the funds. The rapid ascent of Brundwell Rothwell had begun. Oh my god, the last one. Good. My voice. Factory Management in Our Times. Excerpt from a book covering the approaches and personalities behind Dunwall's dominant whaling houses. Seemingly willing to risk any industrial secrets he possesses, Bundwell Rothwell has granted none other than the infamous Anton Sokolov liberal access to the Rothwell slaughterhouse. Sokolov is, of course, well known as on several fronts. The royal physician, he served the late Empress Jasmine Coldwin. The man, originally Tivian, is a fixture in an art world as well, and his portraits are all the rage among the aristocracy. But Sokolov is of interest to Rothwald because of his work as an inventor and because of his associated role as head of the Academy of Natural Philosophy. No doubt Bundry Rothwald believes that if Sokolov spends enough time in the guts of his factories, the brilliant man will continually make invaluable adjustments to the machinery there. Who knows what industrial improvements Rothwald has enjoyed since Sokolov began haunting his Sokolov slaughterhouse? And since the Rothwald process involves keeping the whales alive for sometimes days as a means of extracting more oil from the beasts, Sokolov is keenly interested in visiting so that he may perform his obscure vivisections experiments. In very few places would this be possible, so the benefit to both men is obvious. For those who have had the pleasure of touring Rothwald's facilities, a number of lessons can be taken away. The man runs a tight ship, as it were, with the lowliest workers scantily ever complaining about their role in the scheme of things. The men and women given the most menial labour are issued special cards keyed to the mechanical locks, granting access to the slaughterhouse. There is no other way in or out, and to lose the time card is to lose one's job. Lording their position over the others at the top of the hierarchy are the butchers. These men wield advanced cutting saws developed by Rothwald's top mechanists, working out the plans after hearing more utterances made by Sokolov, and he's commented sourly on the lesser devices used in previous years. The butchers enjoyed a special relationship with Mr. Rothwald because, according to the company gossip, many of them were with him in years past, where he ran a whaling crew that was notorious across the empire. The pressure valves leading directly to the slaughterhouses to the Greaves refinery are a marvel of engineering, allowing the raw oil to travel in record time straight to plant where it is processed. As a note of interest, or dare I say even humour, the local fishermen claim that the waters outside the Rothwald slaughterhouse produce the largest and tastiest hagfish. This is most likely due to the gut sewer leading from beneath the whales inside and delivering their organs and offal to the dark waters of the Wren Haven beyond the slaughterhouse. Now my voice sounds very gravitas and deep. But anyway, thank you for tuning in for this pointing episode of Dishonored. We read today the downloadable texts because these are going to be some books from future episodes next week, the first two. But for now, that is it. So, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next adventure.